Hey guys, this is Naomi and this is Module 6 discussion video, covers Chapter 6 and 7. So for Chapter 6, the first question that I chose as a topic was to define the term semantic information distance and discuss an instance in your professional life where you've seen semantic information distance impact how people in different positions of authority or across employment classifications may interpret the same experience. Discuss how these differing interpretations impact relationships in the workplace or organization. So, semantic information distance describes the gap in information and the understanding between supervisors or those in leadership roles within the organization's hierarchy and subordinates or the employees on certain specific issues. This is an issue that can be represented within any working unit, not just the corporate world. For example, I have a strong background in the restaurant and entertainment industry, and I have worked in several bars and casinos, which is a line of work known for its miscommunication issues. There were many times where something was said that got misconstrued, and I recall managing many nights where, for instance, servers' side work wasn't completed all the way, so when checking out, if asked if they completed their side work and they said yes, they usually wouldn't expect their checklist to be double checked before they left because we were usually too busy to do it and we trusted them. So after noticing things weren't being done, we started checking lists and we would go through one by one with the servers and ask them, for example, is the patio cleaned? They would say yes, but when elaborating more on what it means, like did you empty the ashtrays, sweep the patio, there were many times where they said something like, oh no, I forgot, as if it wasn't, clearly written. And oftentimes it would ultimately come down to the closing server because they are the last ones out. So part of their responsibility is to ensure that the servers who left before them actually did their side work. So if they asked them and they were told, yeah, they did it, then they would trust their coworkers and take their word for it. So when it came time for them to leave, if something wasn't done, it was more work for the closing server. So upward distortion can be seen in that example, which occurs when the message set up the chain of command is altered. Other ways messages can be altered are gatekeeping, which is when some but not all the information is passed on. There's also summarization, which occurs when an employee summarizes the message only to emphasize certain aspects of it. And sometimes withholding information takes place, which is withholding information altogether. And then there's general distortion, which occurs when the message is completely changed in order to benefit the subordinate's purpose. The text explains on page 127 that neither party usually realizes when supervisors and employees suffer from semantic information distance, which I kind of disagree with because relationships do suffer when knowledge or news needed for a task aren't equally shared. There's also a representation of distrust and sometimes even fear among workers or group members. Problems resulting from these different aspects can also cause dysfunction within the organization. The second question was to discuss how peer-to-peer, supervisor to subordinate, and staff to customer relationships work in the context of the chapter. So the text mentions on page 126 that the workplace interpersonal communication is dyadic, meaning the communication occurs between two people and is important to understand the different classifications, which can be grouped into 3 different dyadic interactions or relationships. The first is peer-to-peer, or as the text states, coworker relationships. Being able to effectively communicate with your coworkers is important and necessary in order to complete common tasks, which is essentially what brings you together to form that working relationship. Coworkers also often depend on each other to fulfill certain needs and to help each other complete tasks or provide professional advice, as well as have fun in the workplace, which can add to your professional development, and it also reduces your stress levels. The second is supervisor to subordinate relationships, which takes place between a person in the higher status position and an employee. And this is where most of what I explained above with upward distortion, gatekeeping, withholding, summarization, and general distortion takes place. I like how the text explains brown nosing or sucking up, which it's described as ingratiation, which can be an effective strategy when trying to communicate with superiors. I prefer the advocacy approach, which is more of a persuasion method and falls in line with the KEYS process because it requires you to know yourself and evaluate their professional context as explained on page 128 of the text. And the third and last is the staff to customer relationship, which is the interaction between employees or representatives of the organization and the people that the company either sells to or serves. It's important to maintain customer relationships, and oftentimes excellent customer service is ingrained into the organization's culture. So for Chapter 7, the first question is, what roles are you most likely to assume in a professional work group or school, and what kind of group roles do you struggle with most? As I said earlier, I prefer to be an advocate when it comes to building superior relationships, but it can also be said for peer-to-peer relationships as well. When it comes to certain roles, there are task roles and relationship roles, which is explained on page 156, and they're described as functional roles. The other hand is self-centered roles, which are dysfunctional. In many situations, I've played the coach role throughout most of my career, but lately I stepped back and kind of reflected on my skills and strengths as well as my weaknesses, and I've realized that I much prefer not to take on that leadership task since it's something I recognize that I do struggle with. The text also describes various roles, which is on page 166. First, explorer who seeks out new information. They ask things like, what's the problem? Why aren't we doing this? How can we do it better? Which I can identify most with, depending on the situation. There's also the role of the artist, which is someone who puts together ideas in new ways and asks what if questions. The third role described in the text is the judge, where the possible solutions are evaluated and one is selected to implement. Then that's where the warrior role comes into play, which are needed to be sure the plan is implemented correctly and successfully as they are given the task to develop and carry out the plan. It is important to understand, though, that the skills and tools that are displayed by each role isn't inclusive to just one given person, and it can be incorporated differently throughout any given situation. The second question for Chapter 7, I chose to explain and critique conflict as it's discussed in the text. What do you believe to be most true and useful, as well as least accurate, relevant, or useful? So the text on page 169 explains that the lack of conflict is a strong sign that your group has some serious problems and will not develop innovative ideas, that a group will never reach team status without conflict. I do agree with this, and also agree that the word alone often gets a negative reaction from people when it shouldn't, because conflict really is necessary. Not everyone has the same opinion on everything, and if you have a group that do, then most times there's often groupthink taking place, which can suspend your critical thinking process, and it can also lead to faulty decision making. By introducing conflicts in a systematic way and getting rid of the negative stigma around the word, you can reduce that groupthink, and it'll lead you to a more highly productive, innovative thinking process, and be able to reach that team status. So there is my video. I look forward to any feedback and look forward to seeing your guys' videos. Thank you. Have a good night, guys.